It's been a week since Yelan has been released on the NA Genshin Impact server, so it's finally time to answer the ultimate question for a lot of people. Should you pull for Yelan? Now, to be honest, she is actually quite good. I think she has really high value for a lot of the account, and there's plenty of reason to roll for her. Overall, I think I'm happy to give her a 4 out of 5 value rating, which means that she is really decent. However, don't get too excited yet because, well, in this video, I'm going to talk about why she is a good pull. If none of those factors interest you, then feel free to skip her. Once again, Yelan, while it's really strong, is definitely far from broken that many people have been claiming, and she is definitely not a must pull, so be sure to not get into fear of missing out because that's gonna be your worst enemy for your wallet. Make sure you watch the entire video before you make a decision of if you should pull for her or not, because there is various important factors that you should really consider. And as always, before we start, this is gonna be a meta focused video where we talk about Yelan in the meta point of perspective, but most importantly, before we start, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get started. And I'm gonna start with the most important thing right away, and that is a C0 Yelan, to be honest, is just a side-graded C6 Xingqius. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Xingqius is one of the top characters of Genshin Impact, and Yelan being a equivalent of that is a really good thing. It means that she is also gonna be really strong. The question then arises, well, if Yelan is just as good as Xingqius, then wouldn't my Xingqius already be good enough? And I don't really need to pull for Yelan. To be honest, that is completely reasonable. For a lot of you out there, you might not really care to pull for Yelan just because you don't really have the need to use her over Xingqius, as again, she is not necessarily a upgrade over Xingqius. At the current moment, a lot of the math has shown that Yelan at C0 and Xingqius at C6 pretty much do identical and the same amount of damage. Sometimes one might do a little bit more than the other depending on the team you're running, but strictly speaking, both of them do pretty much identical personal damage. The only real difference between Xingqius and Yelan is that one include more defensive utility, which is Xingqius with his damage reduction as well as healing. On the other hand, Yelan introduced a little bit more offensive utility through the power of her A4, which give you a ramping damage bonus buff for your on-field characters. So it's pretty much come down to a preference of if you prefer to use Xingqius over Yelan or if you prefer to use Yelan over Xingqius. Some player or team might strictly prefer the defensive utility that Xingqius can bring, such as Taser, which doesn't run a healer. Some team or player might rather prefer the offensive utility that Yelan can bring, such as a freeze team, where if you freeze all the enemy anyway, then you don't really care for the defensive utility. Something to keep in mind here is that, however, for Raiden National and Hu Tao team, Yelan is not necessarily a offensive upgrade over Xingqius due to the fact that Yelan cannot apply enough Hydro application, and therefore you lose Vaporize on either your Xiangling or your Hu Tao and results in the loss of damage. And while her A4 make up for it, in the end of the day, Yelan is just equivalent to Xingqius in the overall team performance for both Raiden National and Hu Tao team, so she is not necessarily a offensive upgrade either. Overall, once again, the choice between Yelan and Xingqius more or less come down to preference. They pretty much have identical performance in many of the different teams. It is not incorrect to call Yelan a Xingqius 2.0, as you can easily use her in many of the existing teams that prefer Xingqius. So that means that if you simply enjoy Yelan aesthetic over Xingqius, you can easily use her over any of the Xingqius existing team, and again, you will have a really good time at doing so. The real question is, do you really care to pull for a second Xingqius? And that, for some people, might be a yes, and some people might be a no, so you need to evaluate your position. For some people, they might not actually care for a second Xingqius because the original one worked just fine for them if they're just playing teams like Hu Tao or Raiden National. But for other people, they might really care for a second Xingqius because their team strictly required to run 2 Xingqius, and that is if you're running any 2 combination of either Yoimiya team, the Luke team, Raiden National team, Hu Tao team. If you wanted to play Hu Tao on one side and then Yoimiya on the other side, as they both share Xingqius, previously it was pretty much not possible because you only have one Xingqius. But now you have a Xingqius 2.0, you can simply roll for Yelan as a Xingqius 2.0 and then put her into the Yoimiya team and keep the Xingqius with your Hu Tao. And that currently is one of the only method of you enabling both teams at the same time. So in this case, Yelan will have really high value for those players, as it 100% fine and it's exactly what they're looking for. And just like Xingqius, Yelan is a rather flexible character, so you can put her into multiple different teams like Freeze, Taser, or National with ease. The thing is, usually most teams already have a secondary Hydro character option anyway, that make Yelan just not necessarily like required to play any of those teams. And those characters are like Chayo for National team, Ayato for Taser team, Kokomi or Mona for Freeze team. Nowadays, you have many hydro options, and if you already have one of those other characters, or you're looking to pull for one of those other characters for a specific purpose, then you might not really have a reason to pull for Yelan, which is the second Xingqius, because you don't really need a second hydro characters anymore. Overall, if you're a brand new player without a second hydro characters, Yelan is probably a pretty good character and a pretty safe character to pull for at the current moment, simply because again, she is not only really strong but also really flexible, so that you can easily use her into multiple teams. Nowadays in the Genshin Impact meta, needing a second hydro character is pretty much mandatory, so no matter what, you're gonna have to pick up a second hydro character anyway, and why not Yelan? And again, if you have a specific reason to pull for other hydro characters, then feel free to do that, but if you don't, and if you don't really know what to do, then Yelan could be a really good choice. However, on top of all of these, there is one dramatical factor why Yelan is rated higher than other hydro characters, and that is because of the Xingqius Yelan pairing. The Xingqius Yelan pairing is, to be honest, very broken, and you don't really hear me use that term on this channel a lot, but I'll be very honest right now. Xingqius Yelan pairing is just straight up broken. Xingqius to Yelan is more or less just identical to what Xiangling is to Bennett. They are a really strong pair that can easily be flexed into pretty much any single team in the world. If you remember about the meme previously about how you can just slap Bennett Xiangling into almost any team and it will be a really strong team because the core of Bennett Xiangling is so strong, just imagine the exact same thing with Xingqius Yelan. You can easily slap Xingqius Yelan into almost any team with almost any characters, and it will probably be really strong, simply because the only thing that's better than one Xingqius in a team is to have two Xingqius destroying everything. But even better than that is that both Yelan and Xingqius can actually complement each other really well through various methods. For example, both can generate hydro energy, so they can both battery each other, which means that you can drop the energy requirement on both of the characters to build more damage, to the fact where something like Xingqius C2 would actually actively reduce hydro resistance on the enemy, and therefore allow your Yelan to do even more damage. But the most important factor of them all is that you actually enable the hydro resonance, which increase your healing, and so your Xingqius healing get increased by a good amount, and it's more reasonable to use Xingqius as a healer substitution now, and now you don't have to bring a healer into your party anymore. Maybe. At the current moment, on the CN fear crafting side, they really like what we call a triple hydro team, where they do Kokomi on field and then a Xingqius Yelan, and finally followed by a Anemo unit, and that's one of their new favorite team at the current moment. On the global side, mostly on the Kachingming fear crafting side, we discover and we really enjoy doing double pyro, double hydro pairing in the format of Xingqius Yelan and then followed by Bennett Hu Tao or Bennett Xiangling. The former is called Finirational, which some people have been experimenting, and it's actually quite good because Xingqius Yelan can actually supply enough hydro for both Xiangling and Hu Tao, or Bennett to vaporize. The Finirational team uses Hu Tao, Xiangling, Xingqius, and Yelan, and both Xingqius and Yelan combined together actually does supply enough hydro application for both Xiangling and Hu Tao to vaporize. This is something I was previously mentioning in the first impression video, but at the time we didn't exactly know how strong it is, simply because we didn't have enough data available and there hasn't really been math calculation yet. And I'm proud to announce that this team is going to be one of the new strongest team. It's going to be really meta, and the most important factor is that not only has really good single target damage, it also has really good AoE damage in the form of Xiangling. So this means that if previously your Hu Tao ever lacked AoE damage, now you can actually do a AoD Hu Tao team through the method of Finirational. And that's just one method of how Yelan actually ended up upgrading your Hu Tao team. And of course, the other method is just to play double hydro Hu Tao, which is the new best way to play Hu Tao, as it just increases the overall team damage output. And that is again something like Hu Tao, Yelan, Xingqius, and Kazu, or Zhongli for defensive option instead. There are some other team that the double hydro enable. For example, double hydro nation is a team where you use Bennett, Xiangling, Yelan, and Xingqius instead. And in this team, you put 4 Crimson Wish on Bennett, and you put Bennett on field to do a bunch of vaporize reactions using his elemental skills, while sending on Bennett elemental burst to benefit from that elemental burst damage bonus. You might immediately be able to see why this team is really strong, because once you put Bennett on field and you spam his elemental skill, you can generate a bunch of pyro energy, which dramatically reduce the pyro energy requirement you needed on your Xiangling. However, as none of these characters have on-field requirement, like you can can switch off Bennett anytime because he doesn't have an infusion, you can actually switch back to Yelan and cast a second elemental skill in this team, which many team is unable to currently do. Many of the current Yelan team actually doesn't really get to cast a second Yelan elemental skill simply because there is a on-field requirement on one of the characters, either like Raiden or Hu Tao. However, in this team, because that's not a requirement on Bennett, you can comfortably switch back to Yelan in the middle of your rotation to cast a second elemental skill, and that generates you a lot of extra hydro energy, which even further decrease the energy requirement you need on your Yelan as well as your Xingqiu, so that they can both go full damage mode. So overall, you have 3 energy hungry character with dramatical ER decrease, but you also have 4 characters doing damage at the same time. You have Xiangling doing damage, Yelan doing damage, Xingqiu's doing damage, and finally your on-field Bennett doing damage. There are still many new double hydro pairing team out there, like Raiden double hydro Kazu or even Klee double hydro. So overall, you can see like the double hydro pairing just work really well as a core, because hydro is such a universal element. You can easily slot them into many teams. Again, like with Raiden, with Klee, with Yoimiya, with whoever, with your mom. The most interesting aspect about all of these teams, including the one that were not mentioned in this video, is you can see how Yelan is actually not actively here to replace Xingqiu, but rather another character in the party, whether that be Kazuya in some certain party or Albedo in other party, or etc. some other characters like Xiangling replacing Bennett or whatever. Overall, while it is possible to use Yelan to substitute Xingqiu, or even just use Yelan to act as a second Xingqiu if you do need it, the most important factor here is that Yelan is actually a Xingqiu support, and again, tying Xingqiu and Yelan together is just really strong, and it's probably one of the stronger duo pairing at the current moment. And again, if you're a brand new player who are missing a second hydro characters, not only it is really safe to roll for Yelan because she's just really flexible and pretty good, but when you eventually do decide to switch off and get a other hydro characters like Chayo for your national team, Kokomi for your freeze team, you can still get value out of your Yelan simply by doing a Xingqiu Yelan pairing instead on the other party. And so you can see from all of these that Yelan can probably easily maintain good value in many accounts, and that's the real reason why she is rated high. Many of those are thanks to the extremely overpowered pairing Xingqiu Yelan, but not limited to that. However, at the end of the day though, please don't let any of this or whatever other people are saying to overhype too much. There's currently a lot of claim out there that Yelan is a much better Xingqiu because she does a lot more damage, when in reality, again, that's not true, and Yelan is at best really just a side graded Xingqiu for the most part, which again is not a bad thing because Xingqiu is just really strong, but people are for sure overselling her a little bit too much, maybe even in this video as well. She's definitely not as necessary as it seems, because again, there are many great hydro characters out there at the current moment, and depending on your account, depending on what character you have, depending on what playstyle you're going for, there is a pretty good chance you might be better off going for a different hydro character that is more suitable for your need, or maybe you just don't really care about to have Yelan at all because, well, first of all, you don't care to use Xingqiu Yelan pairing and your account is already suitable. One of the biggest downside of playing something like Xingqiu Yelan together with Bennett Xiangling is that it takes away all your really strong character to the point where it might be difficult to draft a second team because you are forced to run something like a freeze team or Geo team from the other side. So the thing I want you to do right now is to go look at your account, look at what character you're playing, and ask yourself, do I really need this character even though she is quite strong and quite valuable? And if the answer is no, then there's no reason to roll her. There shouldn't be a need for you to fear of missing out, or FOMO for short, because again, she's not as necessary as it look or even presented in this video. If you're just looking to replace your Xingqiu with Yelan, that's, to be honest, it's not something I would roll for because it's just not meaningful enough of an upgrade to be worth it for your primo. At least that's what I think, but you are free to make a decision otherwise. I think the most important and probably the correct way to look at Yelan is that she is a Xingqiu support rather than a Xingqiu replacement, and the Xingqiu Yelan pairing opened up some new team that you might care about, but you might also not care about. At the end of the day, again, the most important factor is that you are able to ask yourself if you really need Yelan, and then make a decision for yourself if you should spend your money for Yelan. And while because she is quite good, she is just definitely not necessary. She's not a must pull. She's not so broken that you have to have her. In fact, I would even hesitate to call her broken at all, but I would do say that she is quite good. So with that being said, this is gonna be the end of the video. I don't know if this result was surprising for a lot of you. We were pretty much just waiting to see how strong double hydro is. But with that being said, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I might do a new video covering all the new things about double hydro if I have time and stuff. So I'll see you guys there. So don't forget to subscribe for that. And yeah, bye.